Good morning. I'm Ken Biberai, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. Today, we head to outer space to discuss human exploration, commercial access to space, human exploration, everything. So we have an amazing panel lined up. Susie Perez Quinn, the Chief of Staff to the Administrator of NASA, Sita Sonty, Partner, Associate Director of Aerospace at Boston Consulting Group, and Lisa Callahan, Vice President, General Manager, Commercial Civil Space at Lockheed Martin. Ladies, wonderful to see you.
It's great
Morning.
to be here. Thank you.
I mean, we'll get eventually to the question about like when is there going to be coffee delivery in space. But before we get there, Susie, let's dive in with you. Why should average Americans care about space?
There's so many reasons. The one that comes to mind right now is, because of asteroids. I mean, NASA was able to successfully alter by about 30 minutes the orbit of an asteroid, the timing of the orbit of an asteroid. That's amazing. That's something that's in a movie and it's coming to life. And why should we care? Well, asteroids have done things to this planet before. If the dinosaurs could tell us about it, I think they would let us know what happened to this planet millions of years ago. So that's one reason to care. Another reason to care is economics. The space economy is worth $500 billion, just about. Another reason on top of that would be science and discovery and benefits to life on Earth, what we can learn about the planet, what we can learn about climate change. It can be about discovery and other worlds, this solar system and beyond. It can be about the moon. It's also about national pride too, and stature as a nation. So those are the big reasons when I think about space. I'm sure there's more, but hopefully that helps kick it off.
Well, look, why don't we pivot then, speaking a little bit maybe about the space economy. And Lisa, I mean, Lockheed Martin, kind of synonymous with space and the advancements that we've seen. Why don't you talk a little bit about how you spend your day job at Lockheed?
I have one of the coolest jobs. I am so excited to be a part of space these days. We're going to go back to the moon with Orion and the Artemis mission. In fact, NASA just announced yesterday the next launch dates for that in November. So really excited to see an uncrewed version of Orion fly around the moon, taking a human-rated spacecraft farther than ever before, and bringing humanity back to the moon, and then on to that. So, NASA's vision for that is to have a sustained presence at the moon. So thinking differently than what we did for Apollo, where we went there for a few missions and then came home. This is really to bring humanity to the moon, and then to be able to use that as almost a launching pad to take humanity even further into space. And as Susie said, it's not just about exploration and space, it's what it does for us here on Earth. Every day, every one of us uses satellites like GPS or weather satellites to understand what's going to happen in the weather, to be able to navigate to wherever we're going. Even Uber uses our GPS satellites to be able to know where to pick you up and where you're going. So space is a part of everybody's life, whether they realize it or not.
Got it. So if we use Uber, DoorDash, or want to avoid asteroids, we should care about space. I got these three top ones. So Sita, we talked a little bit about, Susie alluded to the $500 billion kind of market available to space. Like, what does that look like? Tell us a little bit more about what your previous role was at SpaceX, what you're working on at Boston Consulting, and how you think about the kind of innovation and advancement in this kind of new market that more companies are looking to get involved with.
Absolutely. In fact, the projected space economy by 2040 is anticipated to be valuated between $1.2 and $1.4 trillion in 18 years. We've seen in the time frame from 2017 to 2021, there were 752 independent financial activity rounds of investment into space companies across the value chain. And of those individual financing rounds, year on year, there was an increase of over 6% of valuation. And that was in the latter 2 years of that 5 to 5.5 year window. So we're actually seeing not just a big number in terms of the value of the space economy, but we're seeing a momentum, a real drive behind wanting to put your capital in this market. And it's not just the imagination that drives investors, right? Although I think it's fair to say that space is one of those domains where imagination has a really unique value proposition. But it's also what kind of return can we derive on the investment? And here's some of the use applications. We can go back to human spaceflight as you said, my most recent tenure at SpaceX as head of human spaceflight in the sales division was really focused on identifying, is there a marketplace for private astronaut missions, something that we actually had the honor of partnering with NASA on? Is there a long-term trajectory for commercial human spaceflight, really? And the answer has been yes. I was really excited to see finally the announcement, which we've been holding off on for a long time, of our good friend Dennis Tito saying that he's going to go back to space decades after having been the first human space tourist, right? Decades ago. But that's not all. That's the tip of the spear. That is, of course, that which excites the imagination. But let's bring it down to earth for a moment. When we talk about connecting remote villages in sub-Saharan Africa, or forget about getting outside of the United States, when we talk about delivering secure broadband connectivity to remote locations in Alaska, that kind of connectivity is not available through traditional terrestrial connectivity capabilities, right? 5G cellular towers, we've all had the moments where we're driving from place to place, even in continental US, and we lose coverage. Satellite connectivity, particularly from low Earth orbit, is designed to actually fill that gap and deliver what we call last mile service. And that is one of a number of rapidly growing segments of the space value chain that are both attracting that excitement in the investment, require a lot of capital, but are solving problems for real humans on Earth that you assume there's some kind of technological solution out there, and the reality is that that solution happens to be in low Earth orbit. So there's any number of other solutions, but that's one that probably means a lot to me personally, because I think about the implications that it has for the globe in terms of providing internet access, broadband connectivity, and actually level setting and providing equity and equality in terms of connectivity, almost as a human right across the globe.
So Susie, let's talk a little bit more about that kind of extension of the scientific opportunities, right? Web, DART, Earth observation. I saw an article today that technology that is now coming out of innovations in space may lead to 5-minute EV charging, for example, right? I mean, it seems like it can accelerate a lot of innovation.
Absolutely. So one of the places where I think about space and science is the International Space Station. So we just had Crew 5 launch up last week. And they're going up on a commercial rocket. Our NASA astronauts are up there right now, and there's a ton of cool science that they're doing on station. They can use the microgravity environment to learn things about cells and tissue that we can't replicate in labs on Earth. For things like retinal transplants, so things that would apply to your vision. There's sensing and views of the Earth from some instruments up there that can tell us about urban heat. So we can learn things about how hot certain areas are across the planet. And when we test these instruments up there, getting into like applications for commercial, we can test things and commercial can take them to the next level and have free flying, satellites with these new sensors that they've used on station. So that's one place when I think about it. Another place is food. So we've learned a lot about vertical farming in space. And so there's some places like Bowery Farms where maybe we can learn to grow crops in the future that aren't going to require a lot of water and a lot of land. We can grow things in different ways and help preserve the planet. So those are just two examples that come to mind.
So Lisa, I always kind of try to figure out the nexus really of like business and government, right? So I think let's understand Lockheed, right? Like, what do you need from NASA, and then what should you as Lockheed or the private sector be handling, and how does it work right now in terms of like partnering with the government? How does it work with Lockheed as a prime, maybe a little bit there, and then how do you kind of look for innovation from other companies and maybe smaller groups out there to kind of help bridge the gap of technology you're trying to put forward to government?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time, and things in space and how industry plays with the government is evolving right now. I would say a decade ago, NASA was the primary customer. NASA would procure products, maybe some services from industry, but for the most part, they were building things for themselves or for to support our international allies, and like in the ISS example, But that's evolving now. And as Sita said, there's a lot of venture capital going into the space market. We see the space market growing to trillions of dollars in the future. And so from a commercial and economic development, space is really growing right now. And so companies like Lockheed and others see this as opportunity for growth in their organizations as well, as that economy goes from just being purely a government run space to more of a commercial entity. So if you think about other places on Earth where things have evolved over time, where maybe the government made huge investments in the beginning, but over time the commercial industry picked up because there were more of a commercial economy there. That's what we're in the beginning of in space right now. And so, companies like Lockheed are looking at, where do we make investments? Where can we go out and get some of that private equity as well to be able to advance some of these capabilities, so that NASA and other space agencies or government agencies become one of many customers for this in the future. And we're seeing that market really blossom right now. We're really, really excited about the potential business opportunities that are there.
I mean, the costs and risks for doing things in space are obviously higher than probably any other sector, right, Sita? So what's the spectrum of where venture capital, private equity, private industry, and government need to play as it relates to investment and risk? How does that kind of delta get shaped across that spectrum?
No, it's a great question. And I couldn't agree with Lisa more. She hit the nail on the head. There has been this trend towards not only de facto commercialization of space capabilities, but actually intentional commercialization of space capabilities, right? Like the government agencies, they still need products and services, whether they are satellites or a launch capability to the ISS or what have you. However, the ability and the desire to invest all of that upfront cost, that non-recurrent engineering cost, is so astronomical, pun intended, when it comes to space technology. And so, let's think about the economics of it. Is there a world where private equity can and would be willing to pick up the tab increasingly, or venture capitalists or other financial levers? And the answer has been yes. There's both a trend towards the commercialization of financing and the commercialization of ownership of space technology. So you move away from government agencies owning every single component of a really, really large system towards they'll operate, or perhaps they'll even ask for commercial entities to own and operate them. And that, of course, impacts risk, exactly as you said.
Yeah.
What's interesting, and it's funny because I remember doing a piece on space in the SPAC market, and we called it a COVID romance, because you saw this significant boom of SPAC funding and love for the space economy during, of course, we're still during COVID, but really during the height of COVID. However, there was a tension that had to be managed between an expectation of really quick returns, which, of course, in the space industry, that's not how we work, right? Like, if you use the technology readiness level methodology to determine if you're ready to launch, proverbially, and or you have to have such a significant failure tolerance in order to get to that technological readiness level that you need. That's not a quick return that, 1 quarter in a financial cycle, you'll be able to get money back on. So we sort of unpack that tension. And I think increasingly you're seeing the entrants who are actually investing in space technologies today, recognizing, all right, I'm not going to get my money back in 3 months. I'm not going to achieve a specific ROI in, even in 2 quarters. So I'm going to have to be in this for a longer haul. And what financial levers are available to me to make some of those more meaningful, longer term investment plays? So that's obviously a lot of the advice that we put out there into the market.
So Susie, what's the future of NASA, right? I mean, for decades, space has been synonymous with NASA. Now there's, DARPA's doing stuff, SpaceX, DOD, Blue Origin, space. I mean, there's a lot of activity and players, right? Does NASA's role kind of, slow down and kind of, evolve in the future while private sector or other agencies get more involved, even global partners in other countries? I mean, where does NASA fit in the spectrum of activity?
Well, I think we are evolving, and one way to look at it now would be what's going on in the low Earth orbit environment. So space station is up there until the policy of US is to keep operating the space station through 2030. What's next? There's going to be commercial activity in LEO, and NASA is going to move on to deep space exploration. So that's just one example, within the next couple of years of the transitioning of parts of space from areas that it was only NASA and only government actors, where it'll be a largely commercial presence. And I know Sita was mentioning too, there's a lot going on in low Earth orbit with comms satellites as well, which was what I'm told earlier, the backbone of space was the communication satellites, and it's still a major player. So low Earth orbit would be one place. I would also say the science as well, and the partnerships both with commercial and the international partnerships. When Lisa was talking about Artemis, and us going back to the moon, when we go back, we're in partnerships both, again, with commercial and with other countries. We've got the Artemis Accords with 21 signatories, where we're starting to talk about what it means to the nations and people of this world to go back to the moon. So there's a ton going on, and there will be a role for NASA in many of those things. Also with observing the Earth as we go farther away, what's happening to our planet, what can we learn about our planet? I think that's going to be a very, very much lasting role too.
Interesting. So I'd love to get feedback from all three of you kind of in this sector about just like global coordination and involvement, market dynamics, and how they correlate to sovereignty of countries, and then, different, places around the world maybe being active or not as active, how all of this kind of geopolitical landscape plays out as well. Maybe Lisa, and then, Sita, would love your thoughts on that kind of dynamic.
Yeah, I think, the thing I love about space is there's no borders, right? It has been a great forcing function for us to come together. If you think about the International Space Station and the number of countries, I think it's 14, Susie will correct me if I'm wrong, countries coming together and working and living in space together, it brought Russia and the United States together. I think there's opportunities to continue that. NASA has been instrumental in building that collaboration amongst our international partners in that, and the Artemis Accords is it really taking that a step farther as we return to the moon. And over the last decade, there's been a doubling of international space agencies that have grown. And so that's just an astronomical growth of countries that are now have an interest in space. And partially they have an interest in space because they have highly educated people in their countries, and they need meaningful jobs for them to perform. And so space is one of those domains where you can take those highly educated folks and get them involved in something meaningful that has purpose, that has inspiration for their countries. So not only does it help with their sovereign capabilities, but it's really helping their security in what they're doing there. And then the collaboration and global partnering that's driving as well, I think, has been critically important.
Nice. And Sita?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In fact, I wanted to pull a thread on what Lisa just mentioned, which is with respect to maybe workforce planning, but also education. When you yes, there is definitely an angle of national sovereignty that is both exceptionally important on the civil space side, meaning, yes, there are matters of national prestige that either incentivize the investment in key technologies. We want to achieve this scientific objective towards the moon, towards Venus, etc. But also on the national security side, there is a desire to preserve national security sovereignty in the space domain. And it should not be lost on anybody in Washington that space is increasingly a warfighting domain, and it is increasingly a warfighting threat landscape. And so balancing those two imperatives is really important. But when you strip away civil space exploration, national security space exploration, and maybe a lot of the nomenclature at the bottom of it, at the foundational level, it requires exceptionally advanced workforce planning, a commitment to STEM education that starts at the beginning, that frankly every single nation is increasingly committed to. And that's something that I find really motivating, really inspiring. Governments committing significant funding towards STEM education starting at a very early age, not just at the university level, but starting even earlier, in order to drive a pipeline of skilled talent that then funnels into both the space industry, the future great leaders like the Lisa Callahans and the Susie Perez world, on the industry side and in the government side, that inform policy and technology that can help inform those really sophisticated decisions that have to be made about what kind of technology ends up being deployed. But that is a full life cycle scope of planning that governments are increasingly invested in. And that's actually a common factor across all nations. And that's what's really exciting to see these days.
And I mean, it's not lost on me that we put together this amazing panel, and it's three dynamic, inspiring women, and Charlie Blackwell Thompson making history as the first female launch director. What is the significance of this, Susie? I mean, in terms of building a pipeline of diverse talent that is accessible and leading in a substantive way as we navigate this new terrain.
So for young women and girls, I think they need to see it to believe that they can be it. And they can see, like you mentioned, Charlie Blackwell Thompson. I want to mention Diana Trujillo, who went from Columbia to, educated in Florida and Maryland and JPL. She was pretty primary with our Mars mission, and now she's a flight director. We have 4 female center directors, so Johnson, Kennedy, Marshall, and JPL. So I really believe we're leading by example with Bill Nelson and Pam Melroy and Bob Cabana. And it's important that these aren't one-offs. These are things that we commit to and that we highlight our diversity and our strength and lead the way. Also on STEM, it is something that is hugely important. A lot of our activities at NASA in the STEM field are internships and also grants to institutes of higher education, including minority serving institutions. We are taking a more holistic look at that K through 12 piece as well, because it is so integral. And I know the administration and the Space Council in particular are also honing in on that STEM pipeline.
Amazing. Lisa, I'd love to get a little bit more insight. You've been at Lockheed for a long time, but I think in the space role really for just 5 or 6 years now, right? So talk a little bit about your journey into the kind of pivot into space and what the internal investment maybe at Lockheed has looked like in terms of growth and talent and kind of commitment.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Susie just said about diversity. I think there's study after study that shows that from a business perspective, companies outperform others when they have a diverse workforce, right? When there's a diversity of thought, when there's diversity of experience that comes in. And really to retain and grow our talent, we really have to have our employees be able to look up and see that there are people like them that are in senior roles, that there is that room for advancement and growth in this company. And similar to NASA, I am really proud of what Lockheed Martin has done in terms of diversity. At Lockheed Martin Space, 7 of our executives in our senior leadership team are women. And our lines of business, we have 5 of them and 4 of them are led by women, just similar to NASA and their centers, right? So it is not something that we just talk about. It's something that we're actually doing, and it's having an impact on our business as we move forward. We're also really engaged in STEM and the STEM workforce and what we're doing there. And so, at Lockheed Martin, I had the privilege of being able to move around to a lot of different parts of our company. I started as an engineer working in undersea systems, building combat systems for fast attack submarines. I had the opportunity to spend 5 days on board a fast attack submarine while we were doing sea trials with just 2 years of experience. It was awesome. And it really taught me how important it is to really understand your customer environment and what their missions are, and really putting yourself in their shoes, if you will. And it's something that stuck with me through my entire career. I then had an opportunity to do training and simulation with the Army and the Marine Corps. Went back and did some work with the Navy and ballistic missile defense. So I got a tidbit of space because our missiles would go exo-atmosphere. And even did a tour in our corporate level, leading our enterprise risk management and audit function before coming to space. So I've had just an awesome career, a lot of people that I've been able to meet, a lot of missions that I've been able to support. And as I said, it's probably the best time to be in the space domain right now because with all that's going on there. So I feel really fortunate. I've always had some great mentors and leaders to look up to. And I think that's what's kept me there.
So piggybacking on that involvement of diversity and new talent in companies, Sita, you're on the speaking circuit, you're out and about, you're at BCG now. What are you seeing out there in terms of innovations maybe you hadn't expected, companies that maybe weren't really paying attention to space that maybe are now? I mean, Susie alluded to like Bowery Farms and vertical farming and medical devices, right? Like, are there sectors out there that maybe aren't thinking that they should be paying attention to space, but maybe they should? And like, what are the kind of new innovations and companies that you're seeing out there getting involved?
Absolutely. And this kind of comes back to your original question of why should people care about space, right? So I'm really excited to mention John Deere, who's a longstanding client of BCG, Precision Agriculture. They announced an RFP for satellite connectivity to power their worldwide fleet of tractor trailers. And that's worldwide. That's not just in the United States. This is moving the needle for the marketplace to demonstrate this added value of services that can be derived from space. And what I tend to tell people is space is actually a fundamental part of the supply chain for the Earth, simply put. That means precision agriculture, it means automated driving, it means providing connectivity when you're on the go. All of that in-flight connectivity, guess where that comes from? Yes, it's spotty from time to time, but if it's going to improve, it's going to be the consequence of targeted investments by industry to improve the solutions. And we're all dependent on it now, right? Other applications like connectivity and maritime, other applications like Earth observation is absolutely a crucial one. If companies are going to be able to adhere to or even establish baseline requirements for carbon sequestration and minimization of emissions, they need to know what they're looking at. And to know what they're looking at, they need Earth observation. And there's so many other applications that are out there that just matter for industries that heretofore may have been space curious, heretofore may have been space inspired, but now are space dependent. And I think that is exactly the notion of what's driving the growth in the space economy. I did want to pull again on one of this really rich conversation about the diversity of the workforce, which is, it's not just a matter of gender, not just a matter of ethnicity, it's also a matter of skill set and background. By which I mean, you still need the entire value chain of skills to be able to envision, manufacture, design, market, sell, and then explain every kind of example of space technology, right? So that's communications capabilities, that's sales, that's finance, that's accounting, diplomacy, that's, any number of other functions in addition to engineering. The reason it's important that I hit that point is I do like to demystify space sometimes. I mean, yeah, it's sexy. We love our jobs. We're in the coolest industry in the world. But quite frankly, and this actually, you're thinking on a great comment Susie made earlier, if you see it, then you can believe it and you can be it. I want to send a message out to anybody who may not have an engineering background, but maybe they have a background in something completely unrelated, like political science. And they say, how do I get involved in the space industry or the space economy or the space world? My God, we need you, right? We need that kind of insightful thinking, that ability to problem solve. Problem solving applies whether you're actually doing the extravehicular activity on the ISS, or you're sitting behind a computer trying to articulate, for example, to a John Deere, well, here's how you can leverage satellite connectivity to actually provide last mile coverage for a remote tractor in Brazil. Like, that takes problem solving. And frankly, you can be any number of backgrounds to get there. And I want that to be a call out to people of all kinds of faith, orientation, gender, location, geography, to say you absolutely have a space in the space business.
Yeah. So Susie, doing business with government sometimes isn't easy, right? I mean, like the Lockheeds and the BCGs of the world kind of get it. But what's your message to maybe like smaller companies, innovators? What kind of call to action do you have for them to let them know what opportunities exist, right? I mean, how can like smaller innovators or thought leaders, to Sita's point, be a resource to NASA? Like, what do you want people listening to think about the relationship with government and the accessibility of it or not, or how it could improve?
Well, I think there's a lot of room for innovation and partnership. So one of the great things that we do at NASA is we help the development of technology, and we can help transfer that technology for small innovators. We also have a very, very large supplier network for Artemis across the country. Just about every state, there's a supplier for Artemis. So that's an example of this powerful rocket that's going to be launching hopefully sometime next month would not be possible without contributions from across this country, from businesses of all different sizes. And I do want to go back to this diversity of experience and mindset in space. I think for a while, space was very niche and it was very science and technology focused. And at its base, it still is, right? We were talking about science, technology, engineering, and math, and the key to a workforce. However, there's a lot of brilliant people in space, and some of the most brilliant and the most effective are the people that can talk about a very complex substantive issue to anybody on the street, to a fourth grader, to have that conversation, to share and transfer that knowledge, and to engage in a really, really meaningful way. So I kind of wanted to pull on that a little bit, because it's amazing when you're around smart people, but the folks that can really have that conversation with the person at the bus stop or on the metro or at the coffee shop, that's where the differences are really made.
Got it. So let's, for all of you, right? Like let's look to post 2030 International Space Station, NASA focusing more on deep space, the idea of a sustained presence on the moon. What does human exploration of space look like over the next 10, 20 years? And open to anybody. Or maybe we'll start with Susie and then we'll.
Sure. So one of the things that we're doing right now at NASA is we're looking at this Moon to Mars architecture. And it's a really, really deep dive, holistic look. It's about a year into this effort. And instead of looking at like, well, how are we going to get to Mars? We're looking at the why and what we need. And we are doing this in consultation with business. We're doing this in consultation with other key partners. And it's an open process. And I think, where does that take us? I want to see how this process, this dialogue here on Earth, what we learn about what we need in terms of habitation, in terms of transportation, how does it get us to that next stage of deep space exploration? So I think like the story remains to be told. I'm really interested to hear what Lisa and Sita have to say, maybe potentially on like propulsive technologies. I'm super curious about, but I think we at NASA right now are laying the groundwork for it with our Moon to Mars architecture and all the engagement that we've done so far and will in the future. So please stay tuned for that effort.
That's amazing. Yeah, Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, beyond 2030s, I think you start to see a sustained presence in the moon. And as we move further into the future, we're going to use the resources on the moon to take us even further into our solar system and to learn more. So, you know, when you think about what we have done in the International Space Station in low Earth orbit and all the research that's been done there around what is the effect of zero gravity on humans and their health and mental or medical and mental, honestly, situation. How do you grow food? What medicine could we do in space? All of that needs to continue to move on as we go to the moon. And if you think about taking humans on to Mars in the future, they have to be, the humans that go there have to be self-sustained themselves, right? They're not going to be able to take all the logistics and materials that they're going to need. They're going to need to be able to grow food for themselves. They're going to need to be able to leverage, digital technologies and 3D printing to be able to build spares for their spacecraft and things that they're doing. Maybe even medical devices so that they can, they'll be able to take care of each other as they move forward. And then as you have that presence there for longer, they're going to need basic things that we have here on Earth. People aren't going to go from Earth and to the moon or onto Mars and not have some sort of way to entertain themselves, things that they would want to do there. So I would venture to say that over the next couple of decades, almost every industry is going to be a space industry. They may not be a space industry today, but they will be. They'll all be involved in space in one way or another.
Wow. Now, Sita?
I completely agree. And as soon as you said that, Lisa, I was imagining, what is it like to Netflix and chill on Mars? What is my pod like? And I think this is actually super important. What you mentioned about mental health is really important. When we were designing, Inspiration 4. Jared Isaacman was my first sale at SpaceX and my first mission, and I couldn't have been more honored to be doing this. The first question, he and I, nobody else in the room, we sat down and we said, not only who's going to be on this mission is going to send a really important signal to the world, but what kind of scientific research are we taking up with us? What is the message that we want to send? We actually want to send the message that anybody can go to space. Okay, well, let's actually put not our money where our mouth is, but your money, Jared, where our mouth is.
Yeah.
But what does that mean? What that means is designing physical habitats where people with disabilities can actually have a sustainable existence and a comfortable existence in different orbital locations. Different mental health strains will absolutely create problems that need to be solved, and solving mental health problems. What does telehealth in space look like, right? What does physical or occupational or psychological therapy look like in space? Jared and I actually sat down and had some really, really important conversations about these topics. These kinds of conversations continue. They continue to evolve. They will require technology. They will require futurist thinking to adapt to and to imagine those scenarios, but actually ground them in physical infrastructure requirements, science, right? Like scientific rigor to say, can we design this thing in that environment? But also try to figure out what some additional humanistic solutions will have to be as part of that. We need people who are especially skilled or trained to be able to provide therapy in a physically challenging environment, for example, right? These are hypothetical, and as much as it's nice to think about all of the exciting, fun things that go on in space, it's important to think about what the challenges are going to be to actually make space equitably accessible, not just to the cream of the crop of the cream of the crop of the astronaut programs of the world, but to humanity as a, when the question is about human exploration, you actually want to level the playing field and you want to make it accessible to those who may not pass all of the tests that are required to be an astronaut today, but maybe actually want to be part of equitable access to space, tomorrow or a couple of decades from now. And what's really great is to see that that's increasingly part of the dialogue. In fact, when we submitted a response to the Moon to Mars, a request for comment from NASA, those were critical components that we as an organization flagged. We said, as you think about designing physical habitats, think about what a community space looks like. Think about what a religious or spiritual space looks like in some of these locations on the Moon, in Mars, and what are some of the physical constraints that the elderly might experience, that diabetics might experience, that anyone who's experiencing mental health challenges might experience. These are real questions that are just really grounded in the reality.
So to close it out, I mean, just a little bit of an understanding, there's just more activity. There's more satellites. There's going to be more commercial kind of tours and visits. There's going to be a sustained presence on the Moon. There might be resources and technology that comes in. How do you establish a framework for coordination more broadly globally, right? I mean, Susie, how does NASA not only come up with the innovations and lean on the private sector, but how do we create a framework, a kind of coordination about like the amount of traffic and velocity of things going into space? I mean, not necessarily space trash, but it's getting crowded, right? I mean, it's limitless, but at the same time, like you have to kind of be tracking all this stuff, right? I imagine.
So I think it's about leadership, right?
Yeah.
And it's about when we talk about going back to the Moon, and we think about norms and behavior, because when we think about space, not just for the explorers or sustaining humans, what does it mean about humanity and how we treat something, how we treat the Moon, how we treat each other on the Moon? How do we lead by those examples? And I'm really curious about what people under 20 think about it, because they've grown up in a totally different way than any of us, and they see the Earth and they see things just, again, very differently. So what does it say about humanity, how we behave off the planet of Earth, right? What are those norms and behaviors, and how should the US lead and continue to lead? From an agency like NASA, where we have a lot of partnerships, but from higher up, like the vice president, who's head of the National Space Council, and the president of the United States. I think it's that level of engagement and involvement. With respect to regulation, and what's going on up there. This is something else that the Space Council has started a dialogue on. There's a lot of activities that's like, okay, who's in charge? What happens if this, then that? It can be really interesting, theoretical, ethical conversations. But I mean, again, what happens if somebody spills something on the moon? What happens if somebody bumps into somebody else's stuff on the moon and it affects their resource extraction, which, feeds their colony on the moon? So these are all conversations that we need to be having and that we need to be leading on. And there's a very big place for commercial leadership and other types of leadership at the table.
That's right. Lisa, Sita, any thoughts on commercial kind of involvement, advice, and suggestions as it relates to these kind of next phases we're entering?
I think I would just add, similarly to what we have here on Earth, and in some cases don't have here on Earth, is a set of standards, right? If we want to be able to build on top of what others have done, if we want to build an infrastructure, say at the moon, that others can then build capability into, there has to be a set of standards for how to operate there. And I'll just use, just power as an example here on Earth, right? Every time we travel to another country, you have to have a converter, because we don't all use the same interface for how to plug something in, right? And so I think there's a lot, if we think about it, that we can learn and have experienced here on Earth that we could do differently as we move further into space, and maybe not repeat some of those same problems that we have here on Earth. And so I think that's something we need to be thinking about as well, as a lot of what Susie's already talked about.
It's amazing. Sita?
Yeah, completely agree. Standardization and literally making it easier for us to use the technology in space, right? Make it easier for everybody. Why not? I'm sure we can figure this out. Together we can figure this out. I mean, this panel alone could probably figure this out. So I'm completely aligned with their comment.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, look, I mean, when we started these conversations, you have no idea where they're going to go. And like 3D printing, vertical farming, John Deere's involvement in space, mental health in space, Netflix, like none of those things were kind of top of mind when we started this. I'm so grateful to all three of you for taking the time to be on Coffee with Ken today. I mean, thank you so much. Yeah, and then to everybody tuning in, thanks for watching. You can visit coffeewithken.com to catch up on past sessions, watch this video, and register for future sessions. You can also subscribe and catch us on Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and eventually on the moon, right, Susie? Right, we're going to talk about that.
We're going.
Thank you so much, ladies. Wonderful to see you, and continued success. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Ken.
you.